all over again.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another meeting of the Northern New England chapter of SABR in cooperation with the Gardner-Waterman chapter in Vermont. Tonight, we present Justin Mckinney. Recently featured on the podcast This Week in Baseball History, Justin Mckinney is a baseball researcher and archivist living in Canada. He has written articles on 19th century and early 20th century baseball for the SABR research journal Baseball, Journal of the Early Game, and the SABR Biography Project. He also writes about deceased ball players at medium.com. And tonight, he'll be discussing his book, Baseball's Union Association, The Short, Strange Life of a 19th Century Major League. Justin, fabulous to have you with us tonight. Thanks for doing this. It's all yours, my friend.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited to share with y'all about the Union Association. So just give me a moment while I share the screen here, and we'll be right to it. Okay.
All right.
Okay, yeah, so I'm here to talk to y'all about the Union Association and its sort of brief tenure from 1883 to 1885. So to understand, I guess, the context of the Union Association, it's good to look back a couple of years, and a very important thing that happened in baseball was the signing of the tripartite agreement. It was also called the National Agreement, and it was signed by the National League, the American Association, and Northwestern League prior to the 1883 season, after a contentious 1882 offseason in which the National League and the American Association were kind of in a fight for players, and there was a lot of contract jumping, and this sort of agreement that brought some stability to baseball after the formation of the American Association as kind of the first rival to the National League. And so essentially this agreement ensured that each club amongst those three leagues could reserve up to 10 players for the coming year. So this is really the first sort of attempt to kind of put the reserve rule into practice and really try and strengthen it and give it some legal grounding. And so it basically meant that any players who had been reserved by a club could not sign with another club, whether they had signed a contract or not. So this gave the team control of players for, as long as they were reserved, and this limited player movement and freedom. And this agreement kind of ensured peace for 1883, which turned out to be the most prosperous and successful baseball season to date. The Philadelphia Athletics in particular, who had just formed as their first season, they set a baseball attendance record with over 200,000 fans across about 50 odd home games, which is exceptional attendance for the time. And so as 1883 unfolds, there's 7 fully professional leagues, which is a record for baseball history up to that date. There's 48 teams, and this includes 16 major league teams, 8 in the NL and 8 in the American Association. And essentially the Union Association forms kind of loosely in September of 1883, and it sets off this domino of expansion at the major and minor league levels for the coming 1884 season. So once the Union Association forms, the American Association, in response, they expand to 12 teams from 8 teams in order to freeze out the Union Association from several locations. The Eastern League forms, the Northwestern League also expands to 12 teams, and a number of other minor league teams form across the country and in Canada. And so now we'll talk a bit about the formation of the Union Association. It was announced in late August of 1883. It was planned to be an 8-team league and would see play in 1884. And most notably, it would ignore the reserve rule, which is kind of puts it in opposition to both the American Association and the National League, and they further this opposition by putting clubs in league cities. And the league is formed by a guy called Al Pratt, who had founded the Pittsburgh Allegheny Club in 1880, which is what we now know as the Pittsburgh Pirates, and he had managed the club before being fired in mid-1883. And then the owner of the Washington Nationals was a guy called Henry B. Bennett, and he was named the league's first president. And on the left is a woodcut of Al Pratt as he appeared in August of 1883, and then Henry B. Bennett as he appeared as a young man in the 1860s. So up until, sort of once this is announced, there's a good chance it's not going to take flight because, lots of things happen where people announce big plans, but actually getting league to see play for the coming season takes money, and that money soon comes in the form of a guy named Henry Lucas. So in late October, he officially joins the league. He's a 26-year-old millionaire from St. Louis who officially joins a plans to put a club in his hometown, which will rival the St. Louis Brown Stockings, which we now know as the St. Louis Cardinals. But they had established themselves as one of the premier teams in baseball and very popular. And Lucas really wanted in on the St. Louis market, being a native of the city. And so essentially once he joins and his money joins, it shifts the league from a concept to a full-fledged reality. He soon becomes the dominant figure in the league. And if you read about the league today, his name will be invariably linked to it. And he becomes the president of the league. So he basically just shapes the league and builds it in his own image to a certain extent. And he makes this big splash by targeting established and reserved Major League stars, which kind of puts him in opposition to the rest of Major League Baseball. And this includes Fred Dunlap, who at the time is the best second baseman in baseball, Walter Schaefer, who's a hard-hitting outfielder, and Dave Rowe, who's another talented young player for the American Association. And essentially, once this happens, it kicks off kind of a tumultuous war between the Union Association and virtually every other league and team in the country. And so it's one league against the rest of the world, basically. And there's a picture of Henry Lucas as he appeared later in life. So I think that photo is from around 1905 or so. And then on the left is Dave Rowe, and then on the right is Fred Dunlap, who turned out to be the best player in the Union Association. And so it's good then we can talk about kind of the team makeup of each of the clubs, because that ends up being the big fundamental issue with the Union Association, is that each team takes a different approach to building the roster, and this results in some teams being quite strong and other teams being hopelessly uncompetitive. And it starts right at the top with the club in Altoona, Pennsylvania. Altoona was a town of about 19,000 people, and I think to date it's the smallest city to host a major league club. And essentially it's formed as some low-level minor league. They'd signed low-level minor league players and semi-pros, and only one player on the roster, Jack Larry, had major league experience. They intended to join a minor league, and they were just recruited to join the Union Association when they had trouble getting in up to 8 teams. Baltimore and Chicago, they were owned by one person, Albert H. Henderson, and they signed mostly players from the Northwestern League, which was a means of controlling costs, but also ensuring that you had some of the more talented players available who weren't in the established major leagues. And only Hugh One-Arm Daly, who was a star pitcher for the Cleveland Club of the National League, was the only kind of star on each of those rosters. The Boston Unions, they actually joined the league on March 17th, which was a month before the season started. So they had a month to put together a team and build a ballpark, and they somehow did it. And they did this by signing a bunch of aged and problematic Boston legends like Tommy Bond, who had not pitched regularly since 1880. He had pitched 40,000 innings by the age of 24 and was one of the best pitchers of the 1870s, but was kind of washed up. But they signed him. And then Tommy McCarthy, who to date is the only Union Association alumni in the Hall of Fame, he was signed from the Sandlots of Boston to join the club. The Cincinnati Unions, they featured a few players who had been major league regulars, but otherwise they're a mix of Midwestern talent. The Philadelphia Keystones, they took a similar approach to Boston. They signed a bunch of ancient Philadelphia legends and local youngsters. So a lot of their star players, or a lot of the players they signed on the opening day roster, hadn't played regularly in the majors since 1876. And so they were kind of as an odd mix. And then the St. Louis Unions, they were the strongest team in the league. They had multiple established stars who were in their primes. And when opening day came around, they had featured 7 players who were major league regulars in 1883. And then finally, the Washington Nationals, they were formed mostly of local players from Washington. And the 1883 club was a semi-pro club that had a couple of players who had major league experience, but was primarily a semi-pro club. And this is a woodcut of the St. Louis Unions as they appeared in April of 1884, right around opening day. And then there's a nice photo of the Washington Nationals as they appeared in August of 1884 after undergoing a ton of roster transformation. And finally, here's the Boston Unions as they appeared in April of 1884. These are the only 2 known team photos of Union Association clubs. There's very few images that feature Union Association players in 1884, so I'm just happy to share those with you. Wow. And like I said, competitive imbalance was the huge issue for the league. From opening day onward, it was clear that this was, a big problem. St. Louis was the Class A league, and they started the season 20-0. But this included eight blowouts of the pathetic Altoona club, who I think they outscored by over 100 runs in those 8 games. It was just, they were clearly like a huge difference in quality between the two clubs. Washington and Philadelphia were also among the worst in the league. St. Louis, Cincinnati, Baltimore, and Boston were the class teams. So they're the ones who finished sort of in the first division, to use 19th century parlance. And the other big hallmark of the league is its instability in terms of clubs dropping out and being replaced by other clubs. So the first casualty was Altoona, who had struggled on the field. They went just 6-17, and they had virtually no chance of winning any games against all but the league's worst clubs. Attendance was also pretty disappointing, and even though they had probably the lowest salary list in the league, the club still lost money. And so on May 31st, just 6 weeks into the season, they played their last game and disbanded. Lucas had refused to bail out the club owners and cover their debts. And as a result, the league was down to 7 teams. So what do? You find someone to replace them. And in this case, here's the 1883 version of the Altoona club, which featured a number of the same players. But unfortunately, there's no photo of the 1884 club. And so the departure of Altoona triggers a series of more tumultuousness throughout the summer. Kansas City was selected to replace Altoona. They had joined the league in early June and debuted on June 10th, and they actually formed from scratch. So basically within about 10 days, they had to build a ball club. It turns out to be the first professional club in the history of Kansas City, and also the first major league club in the history of Kansas City. So if the Union Association could claim anything, it gave Kansas City its first start in Major League Baseball. The next club to fall apart was the Philadelphia Keystones. They disbanded on August 8th. They were $10,000 in the hole, and they had just a 21-46 record and very little chance of making any money, recouping the costs, or being remotely competitive. And they were replaced by the Eastern League champion Wilmington Club from Delaware. But then they disbanded in mid-September with a 2-16 record. So they did even worse than the Keystones, despite being the Eastern League champions. And finally, the Chicago club, they moved to Pittsburgh in late August. And if you remember, they were owned by the same person as the Baltimore club, and he just merged them together in mid-September. So again, we're back down to 6 teams. We need 2 more teams. On the left here is Ted Sullivan, who is a very prominent figure in 19th century baseball. And he started the season as the manager of the St. Louis Unions. He quit the team with a record of 29-4 because he got in a dispute with some of the star players. And he ended up becoming owner of the Kansas City franchise, or becoming manager and part owner of the Kansas City franchise. And then on the right is Albert H. Henderson, who again was the owner of the Baltimore and Chicago franchises. And then I guess with all these failures, there is a few success stories that we can talk about. So first off, St. Louis dominated the league, and they turned a profit, and they had excellent attendance, and they rivaled the Brown Stockings. And this becomes a big reason why of what happens in the offseason of after 1884, of what Henry Lucas does and why he does it. And then the Washington Nationals, even though they're a very weak club, they were much stronger than the city's American Association franchise, which had been put in Washington to rival the Nationals. And as a result, that club actually disbanded in August. And so as a result, the Nationals actually built a really strong following. They drew very well. They also paid the lowest salaries in the league after Altoona dropped out. And they ended up being one of the most profitable clubs in the league. I think they made over $12,000 on the year. And they also beat out the American Association franchise. So that's quite the accomplishment. And then Kansas City drew large crowds. They played Sunday ball, which was some teams played Sunday games in the Union Association, some teams didn't, but they did, and they drew very well. They'd often draw 8,000 fans for a Sunday game, and this included a number of Cowboys who were known to shoot off guns in the crowd to celebrate good plays or to intimidate umpires. And they also paid really low salaries, and that made the club very profitable as well. So there's a few teams that actually make a profit, which is kind of the sign of success if you're a baseball owner, more so than on-field success. And so with these 6 teams, it's mid-September, they need 2 more teams to sort of complete the schedule because the season runs till mid-October. And so the Northwestern League, which is the best league in the country outside of, the National League, American Association, and to a lesser extent the Union Association, it was on the verge of collapse by mid-September, and there was only a handful of clubs still in existence across the country who were still able to take the field and potentially put up a fight. And so essentially Milwaukee and St. Paul of the Northwestern League, they end up joining the Union Association to replace the departed Wilmington and Pittsburgh clubs. Milwaukee's schedule would include only home games, and as a result, they did very well and drew good crowds and made a profit. And St. Louis actually only played games on the road, so they played 9 road games. They're the only club in Major League history to never play a home game. And in fact, I believe Minnesota wouldn't host a Major League game until 1961. So. As we come to a close, so end of the season, St. Louis easily won the pennant with a 94-19 record. It's still the best winning percentage by any Major League club. And then Cincinnati finished second place with a 69-36 record. So even though they're 25 games behind in the standings, by the end of the season, they were likely the equal of St. Louis. And in fact, both clubs played some exhibition games against each other and split those games. And they also played exhibition games against the Louisville Colonels, who had finished in third place in the American Association, and they split those series as well. And Milwaukee finished 8-4 in their 12 games in the Union Association. They drew very well, and they had a strong 3-man rotation, including a guy called Ed Cushman, who pitched a no-hitter in his first start in the Union Association, and then in his second start, he lost a no-hitter in the 9th inning. So he almost set the record with back-to-back no-hitters all the way back in 1884. And then Baltimore and Boston also finished about 500 for the league. But the season ended, and if you know anything about the history of the Union Association, you know 1884 was the only season it took the field, and we'll get into a bit of why that happened. There were plans for it to exist in 1885. Several of the league's eastern clubs, including Washington and Boston, had withdrawn from the league, and so plans went forward with a fully Western version of the Union Association. So in this case, Western would include St. Louis and Kansas City and places like Cleveland and Detroit. And these plans were well underway into January 1885. But at the same time, these plans were going on, and Lucas was acting as league president. He was also negotiating with the National League about the possibility of moving his pennant-winning St. Louis club to the National League, which was likely his goal all along. And I feel if the Union Association had been more successful, he might have stuck with it. But because he was fronting a lot of the costs for the league, I think he saw the National League as a path to making some of his money back. And as a result, the Union Association collapsed without his involvement. But nonetheless, a few of the clubs still saw play in 1885. So St. Louis joined the National League, Washington joined the Eastern League and actually won the pennant, and Kansas City and Milwaukee joined the Western League. Notably, St. Louis finished in last place in 1885, so it gives you a sense of the disparity between the Union Association quality and the National League quality. In 1886, the clubs from Washington and Kansas City joined the National League, and those 3 clubs finished 6th, 7th, and 8th. So St. Louis finished 6th, I think Kansas City 7th, and Washington 8th. So in 1886, 3 Union Association alumni saw play in the National League. So that's a lesser discussed legacy of the league. And so then comes down to the final question, which is the one I typically get the most. Is it a major league? And I think if you're familiar with the Union Association at all, a lot of that might come from Bill James's essay in the new Bill James Historical Abstract from 2001. He writes this really potent essay that disparages the quality of the Union Association and questions whether it should be considered a major league, and says it's a mistake to consider it as such. And I think statistically, it is undoubtedly the worst major league, save for probably the early seasons of the National Association. I know the National Association is not officially recognized as major league, but I'm an A truther, so to speak. And so I think it should be qualified as a major league personally. So I think that argument, statistically, it's a very weak league. There's no issues with that. But then the other question comes down to like part of why people don't really know much about the Union Association or don't give it a lot of credit. There's not a real strong legacy to it. We have the National League, which still exists today. The American Association gave birth to a bunch of baseball's iconic franchises like the Brooklyn Dodgers and Cincinnati Reds, etc. And the Players League sort of signified this revolt of players and owners, and like that battle that kind of continued on all the way to Kurt Flood and probably even to nowadays. And then finally, the Federal American League still exists, and the Federal League in 1914 gave birth to the antitrust exemption. The Union Association doesn't have that strong legacy of any of those leagues. It gave us Kansas City's first team. There was a record of record number of California players who appeared in the league, which is kind of a pioneering thing, just showing that baseball had to expand to find more talent. And then it sort of did signal like kind of the first step in that battle between players and owners, because the Union Association was staunchly pro-player. And as a result, they kind of were the first step of trying to like fight against the reserve rule, which what the National League and American Association did in response was to make the reserve rule even stronger, and they used it to blacklist players and make it more of a weapon. And so this sort of signals that first step in that battle and fight that sort of culminates, nearly 100 years later with Kurt Flood. And I think it's important to consider the context of the Union Association and its existence, notably that organized baseball saw the UA as an issue, maybe even a threat, and they did everything they could to undermine and kill it. And so that is, to me, there's no other league like it that is not considered a major league. So I think, given that, I think it's worth considering as major league. And finally, the historical tradition of just how it's been perceived by, baseball's earliest historians, like Al Spink, who invented the Sporting News, and he created the Sporting News, and he later claimed to have worked as a secretary for Henry Lucas, and he was a St. Louis native. He wrote one of the first histories of baseball in 1910 with the National Game, and he features the St. Louis Unions and the Union Association quite prominently in the book, and features a number of photographs of St. Louis Union players, and he speaks very highly of it, and I think he treats this as a major league. And one of his disciples is a guy named Ernest Lanigan, who is another great statistician and historian. He invented the OBI, and he was also grew up in St. Louis and was familiar with the St. Louis Unions. And when he writes the first baseball encyclopedia in 1922 called the Baseball Encyclopedia, he also gives the Union Association equal weight with the other major leagues. And then, he was I believe the first historian at the Baseball Hall of Fame, and he mentored Lee Allen, who became one of the prominent researchers in baseball history, and he also likely gave it that credit. And so in 1969, when the Macmillan Encyclopedia comes out, which is kind of the first official attempt to straighten the record and solidify like what is a major league, what isn't, it's not a surprise that the Union Association is considered a major league because Lee Allen was heavily involved with that decision-making process. And so, you can see from 1910 onward, and even before that, it was considered a major league. So I just don't see a reason why not to consider it. So that sort of concludes everything. I have this book that just came out a few months ago. It's available anywhere books are sold. The list price, I think, is a bit pricey, but there's also an ebook available if economics are an issue for it. But happy to take any questions or comments, and I'll just stop sharing my screen right now.
Everyone can unmute at this point.
Nice job. Nice job.
Thank you.
There's a question I'm trying to figure out where either I wrote it or I edited it in one of the SABR 19th century books, but there was something that happened in Kansas City in which they ran out of players and they started recruiting people out of the stands. Do you know anything about that?
The game you might be thinking.
If you look at Baseball Reference, there's actually like 50 something players on the Kansas City roster, because they were just pulling people from wherever, and most of them they don't even know who the names were and all that.
So I think the event you might be thinking of is there's a game in Boston in August.
Okay.
Lou Brown, who was the starting catcher, he didn't show up for the game because he was kind of a known alcoholic, but also a fun-loving guy, kind of like a Rube Waddell kind of figure. He doesn't show up for the game. They put in their backup catcher. He hurt his hand like in the first inning, so then they have no catcher, so they recruit a guy from the stands called Murphy. He comes in, plays catcher. Within 2 minutes, he's allowed like 3 pass balls, made 2 errors, so they just stick him in left field the rest of the game, and and no one knows who this guy is, and trying to find a Murphy in Boston is like, so that might be the story you think of, because that's definitely.
I wrote the SABR bio of Lou Brown, so that's obviously it. I just couldn't
and it's one of my favorite stories. I read about it in the book. It's just and the wild thing is that Boston won that game. Like this, like despite this guy, nearly set the ballpark on fire with how inept he is. They win the game, and so I would love to figure out who that guy is, and I've spent time digging on him, but there's nothing, and that's one of the fun stories in the Union Association.
But do you have a reason why Kansas City had so many? Was there any other team that had 50-something players?
Washington also did the same thing. They had the same amount of players. Kansas City, what they were doing, when Ted Sullivan took over, he just churned through talent, trying to find anyone who could play, and he signed them for cheap salaries. And then as teams started to fold throughout the summer, like there's a bunch of Northwestern groups started to fold, he's like the first guy on site to try and recruit those players. And then with the Nationals, it's kind of the same thing in that they start the season with a salary of $14,000 for 11 players. By mid-season, they're down to $7,000 for 11 players, and they're just trying to save money and cut costs. And not surprisingly, both those teams, despite being awful on the field, are like two of the most profitable teams in the league because they just, the fan interest was there, but also they were very savage about just trying to find whoever they could at the cheapest price available.
Wow.
Yeah, trying to find a guy named Murphy in Boston is like trying to find a guy named Smith. I mean, come on.
There's a guy named Smith who played one game for the Baltimore Unions as a pitcher. I'm pretty sure I know who it is, but I don't have the smoking gun. So, yeah.
No, I'm curious as to how deep of a dive you are doing into the Union Association. Now, of course, you've written the book and you've got a lot of data that's out there right now. Are you continuing to research to try to fill in some of the gaps that are prevalent in the statistical history of the league, or are you at this point kind of saying, okay, I think I've got everything that's out there?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So the reason I got into writing this book and learning about the Union Association was I was involved with the Biographical Research Committee and the Pictorial History Committee, and the Pictorial History Committee is trying to find photos of every major league player, and there's a ton of Union Association guys who we don't have photos for, and then the Biographical Committee is trying to find death dates and like clearly identify every player, and same thing with the Union Association. So I built up these case files for all these players, and that's how we sort of got into. I kind of started being really curious about the Washington Nationals and what was wrong with them. Why did they have so many obscure players? And then learn how the league's structured and all that sort of stuff. So that's that's an ongoing area of interest for me. It's still trying to find out some of these players. But like from a box score perspective, we have all the box scores. I've located attendance figures for about 66% of the games. So I was able to make a lot of attendance projections and stuff with that. So, I mean, there's obviously like pieces like that, but we generally have a good sense of the story. And the way the book is structured is I try and tell it chronologically, but sort of focus like almost like a month per chapter and focus on a different team each chapter so that every team gets a little bit of sunshine on it. Because I think a lot of people, if you just read about the league, you just hear about Henry Lucas, you hear about maybe the Altoona club and how bad it is. Fred Dunlap has this obscene stat line, and then like that's about it. So I wanted to like tell the story of just like all these odd things that happened and put it in context too, like why was it the way it was? Why didn't it work? Was there a way it could have worked? That sort of stuff.
Can you give us a flavor of, and obviously don't spill the whole book. Give us a flavor or an idea or some of your favorite strange things that happened during this campaign, because we all know there was some good stories out there, and I'm interested to hear what you felt was either the strangest or the best or whatever, what have you.
So I initially wanted to call the book "Where Is Left Field, Mr. Baker?" It's based on this story that happens in the preseason with the Washington Nationals. They're about to play Georgetown University, and this is a guy who was on the team later recalling this happening. And there's this outfielder named Carroll, who again is in the record book as Carroll. We don't know his first name, and he says to the team captain Phil Baker, as they're about to take the field, "Where is left field, Mr. Baker?" And it's like this idea that this guy has been signed to play for the team and has no idea where left field is. And like that was, just okay. That's like a really odd, strange story, and it tells you something about what's going on with this league. It's not the whole story, but I just became very fascinated by that story, and that was a big inspiration for like wanting to dig deeper on the league. So that's probably my favorite story. And then the other one that I can highlight is if you've heard of Charlie Lee Sweeney, he was a starting pitcher for Providence in 1884. He's teammates with old Hoss Radbourne. They hate each other. but they're both like exceptional pitchers. In fact, like Sweetie sets the strikeout record earlier in the season for a single game with 19. And basically he's in a feud with Radbourne. Radbourne gets hurt. Sweetie gets hurt. Sweeney doesn't want to keep pitching. He comes back to the team. He's really just upset with everything. So eventually there's a game they're playing against the Philadelphia Phillies where they need him to just take part of the day off. So the Phillies are the worst team in the league. They're up 8-2 or 7-2 in like the 7th inning. The manager goes to take him off the pitcher's box, put him in outfield, just rest his arm because he's coming back from an injury. He refuses. He walks off the field. The club is down to 8 players, and this is at home in Providence. He goes to the stands and watches the rest of the game. The team blows the lead and they lose the game, and then he leaves the game in the company of 2 prostitutes, and then from there he signs with the Union Association for $3,500 a season. And this is what causes Radbourne to end up pitching every day the rest of the season and winning the pennant and winning 59 games, is because this guy just quits the team in like the most spectacular sociopathic way possible. And I'm just, kind of fascinated by it.
He leaves the field.
Yeah.
He watches the game.
And the team has 8 players, so they have to finish the game with 8 players. So he's like, because they don't have an extra player. And so they have to just
He watches the game from the stands.
Yeah.
They win the game, and he leaves with, I'll put it nicely, with 2 women.
Two ladies of the night, or whatever you want to say. I think it's just like,
you can't make this stuff up.
Yeah.
And this is in Providence, right?
Yes, Providence. Yeah. It's in July.
It's actually
July
a
19th.
fitting city for that.
A hotbed of excitement in Providence.
Yeah. And there's a wonderful book by Edward Acorn on the 1884 season about Old House Radbourne was a big inspiration. I wish I could write half as good as him. He's a beautiful writer, but he wrote a really great one in 1884 and he wrote a great one in the 1883 season that are just 2 of the best baseball books I've ever read.
That's astounding.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
I remember coming across that story and being like, this is wild. Like, I can't believe this guy's gall, like just how, like just what it would take to do that, to watch your team just like, suffer and struggle and to do it well, like,
wow.
It's just, fascinating to me.
Hey, Justin.
Yes.
I have a question for you.
Yeah, sure.
In your research and some of these numbers that you gave, like, one of the teams made $10,000 for the year or $11,000 for the year. At that time, when they say they made $11,000, did they record just ticket sales, or was there concessions also?
So I'd be happy to answer that. So in terms of like the revenues that get reported, I mean, there's not detailed records for a lot of this stuff. So what gets reported, you sort of take with a bit of a grain of salt, but in this case, it's pretty consistent. Like the teams that lost money, the teams that made money, like that's reported pretty consistently elsewhere. The main sources of revenue for teams at that point are ticket sales, and then also on the road, they go and play each game. There's a $75 guarantee. So if you show up, to play on the road, you'll get $75 for that game. And those are the main sources of income. But the problem with that is that the road trips are very costly and expensive, and oftentimes teams go on the road for like 6 weeks, and they're getting $75 a game. And in cases like Philadelphia, when they're hosting games, like they're drawing oftentimes like 200 fans or less, and ticket prices are 25 cents a game. For all the teams charge 25 cents a game. And so essentially if you draw like 200 fans, 25 cents a ticket, like that's not going to nowhere near $75. And so teams are often going in the hole, both to pay out the guarantee, but also the road team's not getting enough to justify going on the road. So the typical pattern when teams disbanded was, we have a big road trip coming up, let's just finish the homestand and then we'll quit. And then that way we don't have to pay out this extra money. But I don't have a record of what concessions would have cost or how much that would have been like a part of the profit margins, but it seems like ticket sales were the primary driver of that. So you can see like the teams I figured out the average, like if a team drew 1,300 fans a game, they could break even basically. This was like based on like a bunch of numbers that were given about how much salaries cost and how much it costs to go on the road and all that sort of stuff. So teams that drew above 1,300 fans typically made money. Anyone that made less than 1,300 fans like lost money.
So yeah, I guess part two of that question is, you had mentioned Altoona.
Yeah.
And I spent a lot of years in Reading, Pennsylvania. I went to some Altoona Curve games and things like that. But you know, at that time, I guess they traveled by rail.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yes, yeah, 100% by rail travel. And that's the reason Altoona was chosen, is because it's like a hub going from east to west.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that was part B of my question. They get to Altoona, and how far from the train station is the this field? And
so they actually set it up so that the park was right at the trains, like the train station, like you could take the train directly to the park. Basically, that was how it was set up. Like
that's fascinating.
Yeah, and then the reason Altoona joins like in part is in 1883. They get to play all these exhibition games against every single team that kind of stops in Altoona, like on the way going east to west. And so they make a bunch of money from these exhibition games, which is like a huge source of income for like basically every team in the country. The Union Association is kind of prohibited from playing any exhibition games because no one will play against them. And so Altoona is banking on this money that like, oh, we lost money last year, but now we can play none of those exhibition games. And then so that's a big reason why teams also lose money, is like they don't get the right to play exhibition games, whereas like every other team that gets to do this, often it's like very lucrative for them because they're not paying the players extra generally for them, and they also can just fit in the off days with games and make money.
And that was my thoughts, that they would play these exhibition games or town baseball games and pocket some extra money doing that. And then I'm sure there were a few side bets.
Definitely.
That they would, use that to make some money.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, there's a lot of like gambling going on and stuff like that. I don't have a allegation of game fixing necessarily, but there's a lot of characters around the ball field.
Look, everybody has to make a living, even the young ladies in Providence there.
Exactly.
Whatever.
the day before he was in Woonsocket and he did the same thing. So yeah.
Cool.
Like
interesting. That was a good add-on.
Yeah.
God.
Anytime you can mention Woonsocket, you have to take a
Yeah. There you go. Was this a beer league? Did they serve beer at these games?
Yeah, they would have served beer. Like in some places, I think like St. Louis would have. And a big thing that happens in 1885 when they do it in the National League is they have to raise their ticket prices. They can't play Sunday games, and they also can't serve beer games. So it's this huge like crippling economic blow to the club, because I think that's a lot of how they made their money, was they had these Sunday contests, and National League just said no to Sunday ball and no to beer and higher ticket prices. So it was just, like it kind of killed St. Louis when they joined the National League. But not every city would have had it. Like I'm guessing a place like Philadelphia wouldn't have sold beer at games because they had really strict Sunday laws. Like Sunday baseball was outlawed till 1929 in Philadelphia, which seems crazy to me, but that's the reality of things. So yeah, depending on the city, they would have had different rules about this. But St. Louis, I know, definitely did, and Cincinnati likely would have, because the owner was involved with the brewing industry and all that sort of stuff. So they would have been involved, I expect, as well.
Interesting.
When you were mentioning about them having to put the teams together real quickly, was the stadium part of that equation, or did they already have existing places?
Yeah, so Boston, they actually built their stadium within a month. Like their first home game was May 1st, and they started construction on the field in like April 1st. And you can follow along in the Boston papers, like the construction of the field and stuff. And it seems pretty sophisticated. They had like a cycling track and everything. It seemed like a pretty good ball grounds. Kansas City already had like a park, but they just sort of expanded it as the season went along. And then like St. Louis built the park from scratch as well, and like he wanted to rival like Chris Bondurant, who kind of invented the multi-faceted entertainment facility where he had he had like water slides and all sort of stuff and like all these kind of crazy things. And he like Lucas wanted to do kind of the same thing for his park in St. Louis. So yeah, they typically built them. And then in case of Cincinnati, the owner there, he had helped found the Red Stockings, and he was in a feud with the owners because they cut him out of the like profits in 1882. And so he joins the Union Association kind of out of spite, but also gets the rights to the Cincinnati Reds ballpark to, for 1884. So Cincinnati Red Stockings have to scramble to find a ballpark for 1884 because, the old owner had kind of stolen it out from under him.
Justin, I'm also assuming that you had to use some microfiche machines for research.
Yeah, less so of that. When I first started, the 1884 season of Sporting Life wasn't online. And so I borrowed the microfiche from SABR, and they sent it to me. And I remember being at the Ottawa Public Library trying to make scans of it. But eventually, if you know Richard Hirschberger, he's well known in the kind of Maryland community. He has a huge catalog of a lot of newspapers that aren't available like online or anything, because he's done all this like scanning of like the Philadelphia City item, which is one of the best 19th century baseball coverage I could find, and as well as 1884 Sporting Life. So I was able to get access from him. But most of the stuff I used is online with newspapers.com, with genealogybank.com, along with like Library of Congress and a few other sites. Like there's so much that's available online that I don't think the book would have been possible in the same way without all its relatively easy access, because I really want to tell the story of each team. So then, I can access the Altoona papers in April 1884. That's really helpful, versus if I had to travel around the country, that might be a bit more complicated. So almost everything was online already, and then a few key resources were like nicely available through other sources.
Great. Interesting.
Thanks.
Do you anticipate an update on this book? Do you plan on doing more research and trying to flush out more?
I'll be doing ongoing research on some of the individual players, like just like the very obscure players, trying to like identify them and find photos and stuff. I don't expect I'll write another addendum to this book. I'm working on a second book right now that's on, it'll be on the 1890 Philadelphia Athletics, who in July they were in first place and a pennant contender, and in mid-September they had lost so much money they released their whole roster. They signed a bunch of sandlotters and finished the season 0-21, and that 0-21 stretch is the worst 21 game stretch by any club in Major League history. And so I'm just fascinated by this team going from like first place to the worst club of all time. And so that's kind of the premise for the next book.
That's the first club that intentionally tanked.
for what benefit, who could say? Just to finish out the season. But it's pretty sad sack. And so on the last day of the season, they fielded a roster where we've just confirmed who the pitcher was, but the outfield remains completely anonymous. There's another guy who we don't know his first name as well. And so on the last day of the season, there's 4 players who we just know nothing about, and I'm fascinated by that. And it was played in front of about 15 people in Gloucester, New Jersey. So, yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. It was just a sad end to the season. And this is the team that, 2 months before was in first place.
When folks talk to me about SABR, and the first thing out of their mouths in a lot of cases is, "Oh, you guys are all numbers based, and you're coming up with these wild statistics and whatnot." You, my friend, are a prime example of the opposite of that thought. This book is it's a look at a part of baseball history that's not really discussed, and I'm going to speak out of school, so correct me if I'm wrong, Justin, that sure. It's not really taken quite as seriously as other major leagues of long ago.
Yeah, I definitely say that.
You're a prime example of some of the best when it comes to historians in SABR. This is fantastic stuff.
Well, thank you for saying that. That's very kind of you. A big reason why I wrote the book too was also that like no one had written a book on the Union Association
Yeah.
before, which generally surprised me because in baseball, someone's written a book on every single thing. And so the fact that, like, oh, here's this thing that's really interesting to me and no one's done a thing with it, I might as well go for it. Because yeah, I mean, I love Mickey Mantle, but we don't need more Mickey Mantle biographies probably, or more Babe Ruth or whoever you want to say. There's a lot of stuff out there about those guys. So let's, go in the opposite direction.
That's very interesting. Very interesting. What else do we have for Justin this evening?
I have a question for Justin.
I was waiting for Dick to have a
Okay.
question.
If there's one ball player that epitomizes the Union ball player, who would that ball player be?
Yeah, there's a couple I could name. Like Fred Dunlap stands out because he was a star player who joined the league, is the best player in the league. He's the captain and manager of the pennant winners. He hits 412. He leads league in home runs, probably led the league in RBIs, but RBIs didn't exist. He also was, like I said, the manager. He led the league in almost every category, was the best defensive second baseman. And he's worth the money, if you could say anyone's worth money. And his OPS plus, I think, is the best by someone not named Barry Bonds, of all time for that season. Obviously, take with a grain of salt. So he's sort of like the epitome in a lot of ways. But yeah, then otherwise there's guys like Billy Taylor, who was the star pitcher for St. Louis. He was a famously unreliable character, alcoholic, all that sort of stuff. And he'd come from Pittsburgh, and he ended up going 25-4 for St. Louis. He hit like 370 as in part-time play, in the field. And then in July, he quits the club to go to Philadelphia because he's taken advance from the Philadelphia Athletics, and he tries to get Henry Lucas to pay that advance and then he joins Philadelphia, and he ends up winning another 15 games there. So he ends up with 40 wins across the two leagues. He finishes top 10 in WAR in both leagues, but he also is just this weird guy who could never kind of stay straight for any length of time. And so in the off season prior to signing with St. Louis, what happens to him is he is arrested in Pittsburgh for theft because he's borrowed this diamond pin from like a jeweler who wants his money.
Borrowed it?
He borrowed it. He's like, oh, it's a loaner, whatever. He never gave it back. So he goes to jail. His owner, who's also the president of the American Association, bails him out, and then he keeps the pin anyway. And then he gets released by Pittsburgh, doesn't pay the owner back, doesn't pay the jeweler, and then he umpires a ball game between a team of blonde women and brunettes, and he ends up falling in love with one of the brunettes, gets married 2 days later to a 16-year-old girl from Lancaster, Pennsylvania named Rosa Garrity, who is one of the players on the club. And then they signs with the Union Association. This happens within a span of about 10 days. And so this is just Billy Taylor's world. And then he goes to New Orleans and plays down there all summer. And I think he ends up in Cuba at one point, and it's just like he's just a wild guy who bounced around. And it's just life as a ball player. If you could play ball, you would keep getting chances. And just it didn't matter what you did with your personal life.
I can follow him.
Yeah. So
And we know where the pin ended up.
Yeah.
16-year-old girl from Lancaster.
Yeah. I've tried to track down what happened to the marriage, but I couldn't find any details about it. Yeah.
I'm not sure you want to know.
I'm guessing it wasn't long lasting. Let's just say that.
What a great story.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
I just want to take a second here to acknowledge the fact that Art Springsteen has popped in here. Hey, Art. How you
Hello,
doing,
all. Well, yeah, I'm okay. I'm here.
Attaboy. Glad to see you.
Good to see you all.
Justin, this has been fabulous, man.
Glad you enjoy it.
I bet you, oh my God. And I'll bet, how many stories did you leave out?
Yeah. I mean, there's I don't know. It's like, have to kind of fit it in somewhere. I tried to balance it, because there's certain things that I'm very interested in that maybe are, what the general
Right.
public is going to be interested in. So kind of have to pick and choose. But I tried to leave it those. And there's another guy I became obsessed with called Jack Lilly, who pitched for Altoona in Chicago that year, and from every year from 1878 to 1887, basically his entire professional career, he's suspended or released at least once per season for drunkenness, and yet keeps getting chance after chance after chance. And I just became obsessed with trying to find out what this guy's deal was and find a photo of him. And eventually I found a photo. I was like very pleased because he became kind of like this driving force for me as well. And so I spent a couple pages talking about this guy who was not like talented enough to keep getting chances, but was awful in the union association and like generally a forgettable player. But I spent a couple pages outlining his story just because I was just so fascinated by this guy. So that's one of the sort of excesses I put in the book for my own interests, but hopefully people like that as well. But yeah, there's a lot of like good fun anecdotes and stuff that probably left out, but I'm just offhand I can't think of too much. But yeah, there's definitely a lot. It's a book that could be probably like another 100 pages longer, but you kind of have to tighten it up a bit for brevity's sake.
What I'm thinking is, so you did all this research, you found all these fabulous stories about this league. Let's just take a second now and think, how many were lost to the mists of time?
Oh yeah, definitely,
Can you imagine? We got a guy who stole a diamond pin, then wound up hiring a game between blondes and brunettes, married one of the. Wow.
Yeah.
We've come a long way, haven't we?
Right.
Yeah.
And that's what we like to say in the library world of history's changing every day, because the things you mentioned about the digitized newspapers.
Things
that were long lost, and now because it's digitized, hey, look what you just found. That's fascinating stuff.
Yeah. Thank you. I come from the library and archives world myself, and so that's like a big, I'm just so thankful for whoever put in the time and energy, and I'm hoping we continue to get more and more stuff because there's still so much we could discover. Even like I have all these issues of the Philadelphia City Item, which is an exceptional paper, but they're not like they're just scans like PDFs. They're not like OCR, so to speak, to be able to search them, because there's so much I would love to be able to search for, because they have this incredible amateur section with just the list like 50 or 60 different teams and box scores like every week of these amateur clubs, and there's tons of Philadelphia players. Like Philadelphia was the baseball capital of the world basically in 1884. There's so many players playing at that point in time, and so many obscure players that I expect I could probably solve some cold cases of these missing players and stuff, but I just have to just scan with my eyes, and I would much prefer a machine did it for me.
You were talking about Altoona. Were they in the Union Association?
Yes, they were. Yeah. They were there for about 6 weeks.
6 weeks. Oh, okay.
Yeah. They went 6 and 17, and then they dropped out.
They were only in for 1 year.
Yeah, they were in it for 6 weeks of that 1 year.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah, they were bad on the field. They were losing money, and then they were kind of just dropped because there was really no hope that they would get any better, and there was no hope they'd make any money. So,
well, just being in Altoona was punishment enough.
No comment. I will not offend the Altoonians in the audience.
I went to school out there.
Oh, really? Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
You can speak from experience. Yeah.
Mark, tell us, what was it really like in Altoona? Help us out here.
Oh, it was a dump. I mean, it was it was the main railroad yard for the Pennsylvania Railroad.
Yeah.
And it was right near what was called Horseshoe Curve. Anybody ever heard of Horseshoe Curve?
I've seen the photos. Yes. Yeah.
And but it was, I mean, I was there in the late 60s, and Altoona was a dump. It was better than Johnstown, but that's like saying, well,
I noticed Mark Drucker's not arguing this point at all, and I believe that Mark, you lived there, right?
I spent, I went to Penn State, at 3 different campuses, and then I lived in outside of Reading for about 35 years. So I have some reference, and yeah, I mean, saying it's a dump is spot on. It still is. But yeah, I've been to some Altoona Curve games, and it's an interesting little city.
So now
I
I'm
went-
gonna have, go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Art.
No, I went to St. Francis.
Ah.
So that's midway between Altoona and Johnstown.
Right.
Geez, when I put this up on YouTube tomorrow, I'm gonna have to apologize to the city of Altoona for.
No, they've been a dump forever and they know it.
Ouch.
I can imagine the sign outside the town, Altoona. We've been a dump forever.
Pretty
We
much.
must maintain
Wow.
the tradition.
They
Oh,
were also
man.
one of those coal cities that had fires underneath.
Yeah.
Uh,
No.
And so they had a lot of things going on there.
Mostly they had the railroad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was interesting to me that, I mean, I went to a Catholic college, and if you went into Altoona, one solid city block was the cathedral in Altoona. And I mean, this was a really, really poor rundown town, but they had this cathedral that would have fit in Europe someplace. And
Go figure.
go figure, that's where their
Correct.
money went.
Surrounded by neighborhood bars.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Yep.
Drinking Iron City.
There you go.
Well, on behalf of all of us here, I'm just going to put the disclaimer on it now. I want to apologize to the city of Altoona for anything that they may be feeling right now that is negative or hurtful. We love you, Altoona. We do. If there's
They
any
do have a minor
Sabre
league
members
team.
out there from Altoona watching this, we love you. We do. You're the best.
Is the curve still in operation?
Oh, yeah.
The
Oh,
team.
yeah. Yeah,
They're
they've
double
had
A, right?
Yeah, they've had a AA team there for, as far as I know, probably about 40 years. It's
right.
changed hands
They're the
a
rubber
few
ducks
times,
now, right?
but
No,
yeah,
that's Akron.
Oh, that's Akron. That's right.
it might be the Altoona Senators now, or it was
No,
the
they're the
Curve.
curve. Arch
I think
Yeah,
Rivals.
they're
it's still
still
the-
the
They're
Curve.
still the curve.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
Bruce, you ought to tell Scott Bush that you ought to put up on all of these. The views expressed by Sabre members are not necessarily those. That way he's not going to get.
The views
Oh,
expressed. We can rewrite the old Major League Baseball disclaimer for everyone.
I got
That's
it, Bob.
great,
You have
Bob.
a new job. Legal disclaimers.
I've never been to Altoona, but if you ever have a trash Wilkes-Barre meeting, I volunteer for that.
Okay.
Yeah, that's another nice place.
I have been to
This
Wilkes-Barre.
is a tough crowd.
It's all it's cracked up to be.
Wow.
The only good thing about Altoona is that due to some gerrymandering, they had a congressman who ran an interstate through Altoona, I-99, which goes, I think, from State College down to Bedford, Bradford, something like that. And the great news about that is now you don't have to spend any time in Altoona at all. 5 minutes and you're through it.
That's fabulous. Anything else for Justin this evening?
I'm sorry I missed the start. It sounded like Billy Taylor sounded like an interesting character.
Oh yeah, it's great. You should watch the whole thing. It's really very
Yeah,
good.
I'm just glad to see you. We're glad you're here.
Well done, Justin.
Yeah, well done.
Hey, thank
Very
you so
good.
much. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's my pleasure. Yeah,
Yeah, we really
you're a
appreciate
great
it.
group and a lot of great questions, and I can tell this is a fun place to hang out. And I see a lot of the promotion.
Unless you're
Bruce
from
does for
Altoona.
chats. Yeah. Unless you're from Altoona, that's like, yeah.
Thank you, Justin.
Well, we want to thank Justin McKinney for his presentation this evening. This has been fabulous. We went down a road that was a little bit bumpy there for a while. I anticipate some interesting email from those who live in Altoona in the next few days, but hey,
Nah.
that's okay. That's all right. I'll take it. I'll take it. Next week, March 6th, we're going to have a very, very special guest. A terrific friend of mine, Ted Knorr, will be visiting us. He's agreed to present his latest version of Rap's Rap, his presentation on Rap Dixon. Ted's been giving this talk now for well over a decade, probably more like 15 years. And he promises me that it is going to be as fresh and new as it ever has been. And I urge all of you who are watching this now, sign up for next week's meeting and come see Ted Knorr knock it out of the park with Rap's Rap. It's going to be a great night. I can't wait. And I'm just thrilled that he's agreed to do this for us. So, Justin, thanks a lot on behalf of the Northern New England chapter and the Gardner Waterman chapter up in Vermont. We want to thank everybody for watching. We'll see you next week and have a great night, everybody.